In the twilight years of the 10th century, the Southern Tang dynasty clung to its last breath of glory. Within the palace walls at Jinling, silk lanterns swayed like captive stars, and the air hung thick with jasmine and ambition. Here ruled Emperor Liu, a man whose heart beat not for war or statecraft, but for poetry, music, and the elusive perfection of beauty. The empire crumbled, yet inside these walls, art flourished. Liu was no warrior king. Where his ancestors had conquered armies, he conquered stanzas of verse. His brush could summon rivers from ink and mountains from nothing. But his greatest weakness was beauty. He collected it the way other emperors collected territories. Dancers, musicians, painters, poets, all were brought before him, and those who stirred his soul were showered with gold and favor beyond imagining. Among the thousands who graced the palace, one woman captured the emperor's restless eye. Her name was Yaon Yang, a dancer of humble birth whose grace was said to rival the descent of a phoenix. Her face was moonlight on still water. When she moved, the court fell silent, as though the very air dared not disturb the ripple of her sleeves. Liu summoned her to perform privately before him. The emperor built for her a stage unlike any the world had seen. He ordered his finest craftsmen to cast a platform of pure gold, shaped as a blooming lotus flower, its petals rising 6 inches from the polished floor. Around it he draped curtains of crimson gauze and set jade censers burning with sandalwood. "Dance upon the golden lotus," he commanded, "and I shall give you anything your heart desires." Yaon Yang stared at the golden lotus and felt terror and longing twist together in her chest. The platform was small, barely large enough for a woman to stand upon. To dance on it, she would need feet as delicate as the lotus petals themselves. Her natural feet were too large, too ordinary. She returned to her chamber and wept, not from grief, but from the fierce determination born of ambition and love. That night, Yaon Yang made a decision that would echo across 1,000 years. She took long strips of white silk and wound them tightly around her feet, bending her toes inward beneath the sole, compressing the bones until they cracked like dry twigs. The pain was staggering, white-hot lightning that shot through her legs and stole her breath. She bit down on a silk scarf and bound tighter, until her feet became tiny, pointed like lotus buds. For weeks, she could not walk without leaning on the walls. Each step was a blade. But Yaon Yang endured, practicing her dance in private, teaching her swollen, aching feet to move as though they weighed nothing at all. She swayed, she spun, she rose on the tips of her broken toes with the serenity of a cloud crossing a summer sky. Pain became the very foundation beneath her grace. The night of the performance arrived. Lanterns blazed like a fallen constellation. The court gathered in breathless rows, and Emperor Liu sat upon his jade throne, wine cup in hand, eyes bright with anticipation. The sandalwood smoke curled upward. The musicians struck a gentle chord. Then Yaon Yang emerged from behind the crimson curtains, clad in robes of moon-white silk, her feet barely visible beneath the hem. She stepped onto the golden lotus. For a moment she stood perfectly still, a porcelain figure poised at the center of a golden bloom. Then she began to dance. Her body swayed like a willow in a southern breeze. Her sleeves billowed and fell like the wings of a crane descending through mist. On those tiny, broken feet, she glided across the golden petals as though floating on water itself. The court gasped. No one had ever seen movement so ethereal, so impossible. It was as if she had no body at all, only spirit and silk. Emperor Liu set down his wine and rose from his throne, tears gleaming in his eyes. Heaven itself could not produce such beauty, he whispered. He named her the Fairy of the Golden Lotus and lavished upon her treasures beyond reckoning. The other palace women watched with envy burning in their chests. How had Yao Nyang achieved such impossible grace? They studied her feet, those tiny, pointed silk-wrapped shapes, and understood. It was the binding. The broken bones, the tight cloth, the months of agony. That was the secret. One by one, the concubines began wrapping their own feet in white silk, whispering to one another in the dark. What began as imitation became obsession. Palace maidens competed to bind their feet smaller and smaller, each striving for a pair that could rival Yao and Yang's golden lotus. They endured the cracking bones, the sleepless nights, the fever and the rot, and they called it beautiful. Mothers guided their daughters through the ritual, teaching them that suffering was the price of desirability, that tiny feet opened doors to fortune. The fashion escaped the palace walls like silk caught in a river current. Within a generation, footbinding had spread to the households of officials, merchants, and scholars across the empire. A woman with natural feet was mocked, considered coarse and unmarriageable. Families bound their daughters as early as age 5, pressing the bones into the desired shape before they could harden. The golden lotus had become a prison of silk. Dynasties rose and fell. The Song, the Yuan, the Ming, the Qing, each swept across China with new rulers and new laws. Yet the practice endured, stubborn as a weed in a garden of stone. By the time centuries had passed, the origin was nearly forgotten. Few remembered Yao Nyang or the golden lotus platform. Only the ritual remained, mothers binding daughters, generation after generation, an unbroken chain of pain dressed as beauty. It is estimated that over 1,000 years, hundreds of millions of women lived and died with bound feet. They could not run, could not walk far, could not flee fire or flood or invasion. Some carried feet no larger than a man's thumb. The cocoon of silk that had begun as one dancer's act of devotion had become a shackle binding half a nation, a tradition so entrenched that a question it was to defy civilization itself. The story of Yao Nyang reminds us how beauty, once idolized, can curdle into cruelty. She sought only to please an emperor, to transform her body into art. She could not have known that her private agony would ripple outward across a millennium, trapping generations of women in pain they never chose.